What's going on? The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Tickets. Talked a lot of Pacers today. A little bit of Colts questions, some offseason moves. What are they going to do in that running back room? And while all that's been happening, wide receivers across the NFL have been inking deals for a lot of money. I'm joined by Kevin Potts. You should be familiar with my guy Kevin. He did a lot of NFL draft stuff for us. Now he's going to do some contract offseason extension stuff. Kevin, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's a little more of a dead period outside of these contract extensions in the NFL. So taking a little bit time off. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well. And you're right. It is a dead period. The Pacers are out of the playoffs. The Colts aren't playing. There's not a local baseball team. I wouldn't say I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel for sports content, but let's just say that these contract extensions are showing up at a great time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the NFL is a year-round business. They do it better than anyone, capitalizing our attention 365. So there's always something to talk about with them.
There really is. And right now, I really want to talk about these wide receivers because guys are starting to ink second contracts. Like we saw Nico Collins of the Texans. He signed a 3-year extension worth around $73 million, with I think like 2/3 of that guaranteed. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are both not at voluntary OTAs because they want new contracts. The 49ers extended Brandon Jennings. They haven't extended Brandon Ayuk. Like there's just a lot of receivers asking for contract extensions, which is interesting because receivers are usually kind of more of the divas of the NFL. So which deals have really popped out to you the most so far?
I think it's this collection of 3-year deals for these guys on their second contracts. You mentioned Nico Collins, so most of your Colts listeners are familiar with Michael Pittman. Devontae Smith got his deal early, and then Jalen Waddle just actually got his deal about 30 minutes ago. And it's all these guys getting these 3-year extensions off their rookie deals, anywhere from $23 to $28 million a year. I think that's what we're looking at to see with this new age of wide receiver contract. It's really interesting to see how these teams stack these guys up, how they tier them as a wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2, and whatnot.
Yeah, it's the Jalen Waddle deal for those for my listeners who missed it. He's now a top 5 paid receiver in the NFL, which feels a bit rich for me. Like I'm a Dolphins fan, and I don't like the idea of paying my second best receiver top 5 receiver money. Like that's just a lot. What did you think of that deal when it came through?
For the Dolphins, I understand it because it's an organizational philosophy. San Francisco, their offensive line coach was actually talking about this just the other day about they will target offensive linemen later in drafts because they feel they can elevate that position and they'd rather spend money and picks on ball carriers, guys that get touches. Miami is from that philosophy. McDaniel's obviously from San Francisco. I think you're seeing a lot of it here where their fans have been annoyed that they haven't invested a ton of premium assets in the offensive line. I think they also believe they can elevate those guys on day 2 and day 3 of the draft, and they'd rather pay these high-end playmakers, guys like Jalen Waddle's speed, you can't just find anywhere. And I think they think paying those premium traits at position players is worth it because they can elevate offensive line and fill in the gaps other places on the offense.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm of the opinion that like elite wide receivers you pay. If you're average to and below, then you can probably find a free agent receiver out there who's just as good because I think receivers are starting to become sort of like running backs where there's just a lot of them available and a lot of them are really good. Like you can go find a good receiver on a practice squad somewhere. And to your point, like you can't find Jalen Waddle's speed on a practice squad anywhere. So that makes a lot of sense. But obviously, he's not the only one who's signing a new deal. Jamar Chase is going to get a new deal. Justin Jefferson, I believe, is lined up to get a new deal. When the dust settles, who do you think will be the highest paid receiver in the NFL?
I think it's going to be Justin Jefferson. I think Chase has a good shot to maybe contest for it. If Jefferson gets his deal done this summer and Chase ends up waiting until next summer, he might pass it. But I think Jefferson is going to challenge Nick Bosa for the highest paid player in all of the NFL. I think he's the best receiver in all of football. And I think he deserves that contract. So if I had to guess right now, I think Jefferson's going to get that one. They have a quarterback on a rookie deal. It makes it a little bit easier to quote unquote overpay and give that mega deal to a receiver his caliber. So that would be my guess.
Yeah, that's kind of the way that I was leaning too, with kind of the same thing of like, could Jamar Chase potentially be paid more than him. How do you think the Bengals and these teams that, well, I guess it's really just just the Bengals. How do you think they deal with the T Higgins stuff as well as figuring out this Jamar Chase contract?
Yeah, my read on it is I think this is probably Keegan's last year with the Bengals. This is a franchise that historically hasn't given out a ton of money. They run the Bengals as a business. They don't have a big philanthropist, rich owner who's willing to throw out a bunch of guaranteed cash. You've already paid Joe Burrow. You're going to pay Jamar Chase. Obviously, I think T. Higgins is a guy who's going to get pushed out. I think they're good enough that they're willing to just sit on him with the tag this year and try and go win a Super Bowl, but I think he's going to get forced out with a team like that that's not willing to pay cash. Some of these teams that are a little bit more willing to do that. Philly's obviously paying both the receivers. Miami is. San Francisco is going to get to that point. The teams with owners that are a little bit more willing to move money around and fork over their own cash to make it work, I think can manage it for a little bit. But for a team like Cincinnati, I think this is the last year of this receiver course together.
That makes sense. Now, the Colts obviously extended Michael Pittman Jr. really early, and full transparency here, when it happened, I wasn't super excited about it. I was sitting there, I was like, he's the 14th highest paid receiver in the NFL. Like, I don't think he's like that good. Does he deserve this much money? But now there's all these new deals going through, and all these guys are likely to get paid more than Michael Pittman Jr. So with all these other guys getting paid in front of him, where do you think Pittman kind of ends up on that chart of highest paid receivers in the league?
I mean, it's like you said, he already got pushed down so many spots. There's a chance he's going to be outside top 15, top 20 by the end of this summer, maybe next summer, because you have so many guys that you mentioned that need contract extensions. It's why I like the Pittman extension in the first place. I always felt that it was a fitting value for him. He's a good player. He's not great, kind of like you mentioned. And I think this contract is going to keep looking better and better the more guys sign, because there's so many receivers that deserve really good money, and they're going to look at Pittman, Collins, Smith, and Waddle and go, okay, I want that plus one, right? They're going to want that little bit of bump on the pay raise. I think it's going to keep knocking him down in average value each contract that gets signed.
Where do you think is a fair spot for him? Like in terms of all the receivers in the league, like where should he be paid? Should it be, the 18th highest paid receiver in the league? Should it be lower, like 23, 24? What is your kind of stance on him?
I think he's a top 20 receiver in football, so I think he can get a top 20 contract. Now, there will be some guys who are on rookie deals who maybe haven't got paid yet, and maybe some veterans who are a little overpaid on the end of their career. But I'd say top 20, yeah, 18 feels about right as that low-end wide receiver one. At best, what ideally you want him to be your high-end wide receiver too, but I think he's a top 20 receiver and deserves that money.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball, because when we talked last night, I was like, yeah, receivers, probably some quarterback stuff as well. But then at like 11 o'clock, I had this Jonathan Taylor idea. So I did a whole thing on Jonathan Taylor not too long ago. And the Colts running back room is really thin, which kind of is a big deal. It kind of isn't, because there are a lot of running backs out there that could be signed, during the season. Who do you think are the top free agent running backs that are still out there?
Let's see. I haven't even looked at just this list in a while, so I have to pull it up.
Tariq Cohen got signed yesterday by the Jets, which is an interesting thing. He's more of a return specialist kind of guy, though. But that's the thing, right? Like, there are a lot of running backs out there, and I think we're going to see more teams do this where, like, they aren't overly concerned with the running back room, because there are so many free agent running backs out there that can provide some value.
Yeah, and I will say this free agency was generally better at signing running backs than in years past. We saw a little bit of a boom in signing guys, but Damian Harris is probably the one that jumps out. Him and Cam Akers are the two most likely guys I think you could give him the ball and give him a safe amount of carries, because they have done that in the past. And then you're starting to look at guys like a Jerick McKinnon, who's more of a third down back. Benjamin's around. I like some of the stuff that Deion Jackson has shown over the years. So you're right, there are some options if you need to get a sure guy. Latavius Murray continues to play at the age of 45 somehow. So there are definitely veteran options out there, but you don't really want them starting, because they're not the difference makers you'd want on your offense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Any chance they signed Frank Gore? I don't know if he's still playing. He's like the Brett Favre of running backs.
It would not shock me if Frank Gore stepped on a football field because that's the type of player he is. I think there's enough if an injury happens that you can go on him. Kareem Hunt is still out there. Obviously, there's always some press and off-field stuff generally with signing him. Matt Breida is still out there. So there's a bunch of veterans who you can come soak up some minutes. But I don't know if they would get signed until basically training camp. That would be we're in the third preseason game. We've tried out all the rookies and UDFAs we brought in, and we're just not a fan of what they can provide us right now. Let's go sign a veteran guy because we know he can pick up the offense really quick. Maybe bring back an old friend in Jackson, somebody that you know, and just get somebody that's safe if you don't like what's else on your roster right before the season starts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the free agent running back stuff is always an interesting thing that comes up during the season. I think paying wide receivers is a relatively easy thing to figure out. Like you pay the ones that are great, and the mid to lower level guys are kind of like, we'll kind of see. Quarterbacks are a really interesting thing because there aren't a lot of good ones. Like there aren't a lot of great ones. But at the same time, like when you find one that's good, teams don't want to let them go because they know that if they do, then they could be terrible again. And with that being said, like there are quarterbacks that are that have the opportunity to be extended. Jared Goff signed his extension earlier in the offseason, and Tua is kind of the next guy up. Do you think the Dolphins reset the market with Tua?
I think Tua is the most difficult conversation of these quarterbacks. If you made me guess right now, I would say yes, because like you said, there's just not a ton of quarterbacks out there. It's really hard to go pivot off this quarterback, even if it's an overpay, like with Jared Goff, if you don't have an option. And most teams don't have pivots. Detroit didn't have one. San Francisco's not going to have one when Purdy's available. The Dolphins are the interesting one because I think there are some potentials to pivot. I think it would be interesting what does Dallas do with Dak Prescott? What do the Seahawks do with Geno Smith? Those are two guys where I can see if you think you can get them cheaper in Geno's case or a better player than Tua in Dak's case, do you go make those moves? Those are moves not usually are an option for teams when they're deciding on their quarterback. But generally, quarterbacks don't move. So I would guess that they're going to have to pay Tua this market extension I really wouldn't love. But I think you're going to get back into a corner where you need a quarterback, and this team is built to win now. You just paid both your wide receivers. Like you're trying to win currently, and you're going to need a quarterback who can do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I do think that they end up offering Tua that money because he's going to be able to go to them and be like, I got MVP votes last year. We made the playoffs and we did all these different things. And so I do think that he ends up getting offered that extension. And then I'll go cry as a Dolphins fan because they'll be stuck in, 11-6 and not winning a playoff game for the rest of the time that Tua is there, which is fine, I guess. For the Cowboys, though, because you brought them up, and I was going to ask you about them. So for Colts fans out there, I have to explain this to you because Chris Ballard doesn't consistently draft great players. And when you do that, you eventually run out of money for extensions and things of that nature, and you have to make these really hard decisions. And the Cowboys, like you got to extend Micah Parsons, who's one of the best pass rushers in the league. You got to extend Dak, who's a top 10-ish quarterback in the NFL. And you got CeeDee Lamb, who you also need to extend, who was awesome last year. Like, how do you think the Cowboys prioritize those three guys?
I mean, honestly, I don't know because I don't know why they're doing it like this. They've waited too long on Dak where they've backed themselves into a corner. Usually you have an order of operations of things. We talked about kind of getting Pittman done early. I think Philly does a great job. Like they got Devontae Smith super done early. So it kind of makes all the dominoes fall. The Cowboys haven't done that. They've just pushed everything down the road. And now the Bills do. And you don't have a contract for, you mentioned them, your three best players, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons. I think it's going to get Lamb gets his deal done this summer, and then Parsons will eventually get his. I don't know where Dak slots, which is why I brought him up for the Miami conversation, because you have a guy playing on a one-year deal. It doesn't seem like they are remotely close to getting one done, but Dallas has no other options at quarterback outside of Dak. So I don't know how they resolve this situation, aside of Dak basically having all the levers and getting a mega deal because Jerry Jones realized at the last second, oh, I'm screwed. Trey Lance can't play, and if we want to go win playoff games, I'm gonna have to give Dak everything he wants, and then the cap situation is going to be in a really bad spot.
What?
So I don't really know.
You mean the guy that the 49ers gave up 3 first-round picks for to draft 3rd overall can't play? What?
No. Apparently not. He's never really seen him play, but I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that he is not a playoff caliber quarterback.
Probably not
in his career.
It's just like it's so interesting. Like I have so much respect, and I think a lot of NFL fans do. Like it's hard not to respect the 49ers and what they've done. Like they've prolonged this run of being at the top of the NFC, and then they make a deal like that, but they've been so good that like people don't even realize that, like that's what happened. Like they gave up all these first round picks for a guy who's now the backup quarterback in Dallas. Like it's really wild. Before I let you go, I don't know if I've asked you these 2 questions before, which is a mistake on my part because I like to ask people that aren't from Indianapolis these questions about the Colts. You ready?
Yeah.
So first and foremost, people have mentioned Anthony Richardson taking a leap in year 2. Which the follow-up question is always, what is a leap? Like what does that look like? Like Mina Kimes, she did a big thing on it last Friday. The blogger guys around here all expect him to take a leap. So for you, as an outsider looking into, Indy and the Colts, what would a leap for Anthony Richardson be from year 1 to year 2?
I don't think it's a statistical thing. I think it's, does he have control of this offense? When I put on Colts tape, does he look comfortable? Does he not look like the game is moving too fast? Because his thing was always he doesn't have a ton of reps. I always thought mentally he showed a lot of promise. Obviously, the tools were otherworldly. But when you miss so much time in a rookie year because of an injury, it can set your development back. I mean, talking back to Trey Lance, he didn't play a ton. So you get a little bit of worry for a guy who hasn't played a ton of football. How does he look? I don't necessarily care about the team's record. I don't necessarily care if he throws for like 4,000 yards. But when I turn on Colts games, I want to see, are his feet good? Are his eyes up? He's not ducking at pressure. Mistakes are going to happen. He's going to throw interceptions. It's fine. He has a big arm. He should be pushing the ball. But I wanted to see if he feels in control and is not panicking when things are going wrong, when he's facing pressure. That's the leap I want to see from him, looking like an NFL quarterback. Jordan Love kind of did it when he played sparingly before he came in. I'm like, he has it. And it sounds stupid to say it because it's a very big buzzword. But when you're watching him, do they seem like an NFL quarterback? Do they seem in control of the offense? Does the spotlight not seem too big for them? That's what I'm looking for AR in this second year.
Okay, so for clarity, because I know my audience is going to ask this question. Having control of the offense looks like adjusting the offensive line to counter pressure. It's not being rushed when there is pressure. That is kind of what you're looking for when you say that he's in control of the offense.
Yeah, when defenses throw, funky looks at him, they bring blitzers. Does he not just curl up in a ball and go down? He doesn't throw it into triple coverage because there's always going to be some risk when you're throwing the ball, but he does not make really bad mistakes. Sometimes it's just throwing the ball away too. He obviously got hurt this year. Knowing when to slide is a big one. It's making those little on-the-fly decisions that are going to keep the offense on track, knowing you're down in distance, getting rid of the ball, checking it down, just overall keeping the offense on track. Because I think we saw last year, if you have a quarterback that can keep this offense on track, it can do pretty well. So I want to see him keep this offense flowing roughly like it did last year. And then you're going to see the flashes that can elevate that ceiling. But just seeing him raise that floor and being comfortable with very stuff defensive coordinators are going to throw at him in different down distances is what I'm looking for.
That makes a lot. It sounds like you're looking for just a lot of mental stuff, because I think it's pretty clear that like Anthony Richardson has the physical traits to be successful. The question is, how's the processing? Is he comfortable? Can he avoid getting sped up? Because I feel like when guys get sped up, that's when they, throw picks and not smart passes.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason I like Anthony Richardson, why I like him as a prospect, why I think he's going to be good, is I do think mentally he is capable of doing all these things. I think he does a really good job at navigating pressure and being smart. But for a guy with a limited sample size, as we've seen in both college and the NFL, that is still a lot of projection in terms of my evaluation. So I just want to see it more. I want to see him play the full season. I want to see more consistent of him raising the floor of that offense. Because, like I said, we know the flash can be there. The highlight plays are never going to go away with a guy of that skill set. Let's just see you do the actual quarterback things at a more consistent on a larger sample size.
Okay, last question for you, Kevin. You can find, what is the name of your Substack again?
It's Kevin Potts, NFL and draft breakdowns.
Okay, you can find all of his writing there. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinPotts06 just to get all of his opinions. He's really quick about responding to new deals and things with some pretty good insight as well. Last question for you, Kevin. When you view this Colts franchise as a whole, like, how do you view them? Like, I asked a guy from Dallas this who came on my show a month or so ago, and he called the Colts boring. So, like, what is a word that you would associate with the Colts franchise as a whole?
Solid. I feel like when I look at their team, I generally like a lot of their players, but especially in the recent years, I just feel like they've lacked some of that star power to put them in the top of the AFC. The other one would be Andrew Luck. I grew up
fair enough.
Yeah. So I grew up about 15 minutes from Stanford, so very familiar with Luck. So the early years of Colts when I was younger, definitely Andrew Luck and not putting enough around him. But the more recent years, I think he'd be solid. Like, I always like these teams. I think they're good. And I keep waiting for them to take the next step because I like a lot of their complementary pieces. And I would like to see them get in the playoffs and play some legit football and contend in the AFC, which is obviously what you hope when you have a quarterback like Richardson.
Yeah, I mean, and you would think that they can. They're undefeated against the Chiefs since Mahomes showed up. So, they're the only team that Mahomes and the Chiefs haven't beaten, which is kind of wild.
I mean, that's great. Hang the banner right now.
That's right.
How long that lasts.
Kevin, thanks for your time, man. Always appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, always a pleasure.
Have a good one, man. That is Kevin Potts. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinPotts06. You can read his stuff on Substack as well. Kevin Potts, NFL draft board, and all those different things. John Buzzard with a great point. Another word for solid would be the word mediocre. And, honestly, in a lot of ways, I think he's right. Like, the Colts have plenty of good players on their roster. Okay, like Jonathan Taylor's a good player. Michael Pittman Jr. is a good player. Kwity Paye's a fine player, but there's no legitimate star power on the roster. And I think that's been one of the more frustrating parts with Ballard is he just hasn't done a great job of going out and finding these superstars that you have to have in order to win a Super Bowl and in order to win a division, right? Because like when you look at the Chiefs, because they are the gold standard, they have multiple stars on the offensive side of the ball. They have Travis Kelce, who is a bona fide star at the tight end spot. They have a superstar in Patrick Mahomes. That doesn't need to be explained. And then on defense, they have a bona fide star on the defensive line in, what's his name? Chandler Jones. That sounds right. Chris Jones, excuse me, Chris Jones. Like they have a bona fide star on the defensive line in Chris Jones. And they have a bona fide star on the back end in L'Jarius Sneed, one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. So like that is what wins Super Bowls. Much like in the NBA, superstars win, the finals and in the playoffs. It's the same thing in the NFL. Okay, like the reason why the Chiefs win Super Bowls isn't because their third receiver is good. No, they win Super Bowls because they have a superstar in Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, and L'Jarius Sneed. And when you look around at the AFC South and you look at this Colts division, like ask yourself the question of, because these are all three younger, kind of more rebuilding teams, like which teams have superstars and or potential superstars? Like when we look at the Colts, you could argue, and I think I would argue for the idea that Anthony Richardson is a potential superstar given the physical traits, but it's hard to say because we haven't seen him play. That's why the word potential is in front of the word superstar. When, like potentially Leatu Latu ends up being a superstar, the first defensive player drafted in this year's NFL draft. When we look, at the Texans, CJ Stroud looks like he's going to be a superstar. Okay. He was a top 10 quarterback in the NFL last year. Like, that's a big deal. And then, they just extended Nico Collins. People keep telling me he's great. They just signed Stephon Diggs, who can be a superstar at that wide receiver spot. On the defensive side of the ball, Derek Stingley Jr. is one of the best corners in the NFL. On the defensive line, Will Anderson Jr., a guy that they took with the number 3 overall pick last year, like, he also could wind up being a legitimate superstar. And so, like, that is, I think, the scary thing about the Texans is, like, they're going to have potentially 2 superstars on each side of the ball. And when I look at the Colts roster, it's like, are they going to have 2 superstars on each side of the ball anytime soon? Certainly doesn't feel that way. It certainly doesn't feel that way. It feels like maybe Anthony Richardson develops into, a top 10 quarterback at some point. Maybe Latu is like a double-digit sack guy. And, like, outside of that, it's like there's just a lot of good. There's not a lot of great. There's not a lot of superstar level guys on this roster. And when we continue to work through the division, the Titans, look, I'm not a Will Levis guy. I'm just going to completely ignore them, because if your quarterback's not a superstar, you're not winning the division, you're not winning a playoff game, and you definitely aren't winning the Super Bowl. Okay, like, I think we see that with the Dolphins. Like, they've got studs all over that team, but they're very average at quarterback with Tua, and because of that, they can't win a playoff game. And so when it comes to the Titans, like, whatever, I'm not a believer in Will Levis. Who cares? And then we look in Jacksonville, and I think they're in a very similar boat as to the Colts of, okay, we think our quarterback could be a superstar at some point. I'm still holding out hope for Trevor Lawrence and what I saw 2 years ago. Like, he still has another level that he could go to. And then on defense, they've got a great pass rusher and edge rusher, Josh Allen. And outside of that, it's a lot of average to good players. And so, just like looking towards the future, like, I don't know how you ignore what the Texans have compared to the rest of this division. And Chris Ballard has to do a better job of not drafting, good players. He's got to figure out a way to draft great, over the top impact players. That is what needs to happen for this Colts team to take that next step of winning a division and potentially winning a couple of playoff games, right? And that comes through drafting well, and that comes through drafting well and developing Anthony Richardson. Those 2 things have to happen. Thanks again to Kevin Potts for joining the show. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, we're going to get into a little bit of hoops, Mavs, and Timberwolves tonight. Wrap up on the Pacers a little more. Talk a little, Halliburton, Turner, Carlisle, that kind of stuff. That's all coming up here in about 4 minutes.